She took off the ring at 7:42 in the morning, just slid it off her finger and set it on the bathroom counter. A simple band, brushed gold, nothing decorative about it. She looked at it for a moment, then looked at herself in the mirror. No suit jacket, no pearls, no briefcase, a faded heather gray pullover, dark slacks with a small iron mark near the left knee she hadn't gotten around to fixing. Her hair pulled straight back without styling. Sensible flat shoes, the kind she hadn't worn in years. She looked ordinary. She picked up her bag, stepped over the ring, and walked out the door. We'll come back to the ring. Let me tell you what was happening that Tuesday morning. 3 weeks earlier, Celeste Harmon had been sworn in as the chair of the State Judicial Ethics Commission. The first black woman to hold that position in the state's history, the commission had oversight authority over every judge on every bench, from the highest appellate courts down to the lowest municipal rooms where everyday people first encountered the law. Her job, as she understood it, was not to sit in a corner office and review paperwork. Her job was to know what justice actually looked like when it was being administered, not described. So she had given herself an assignment, a minor traffic citation, an alleged failure to yield at an intersection 3 blocks from her apartment. She had declined when her chief of staff, Theo, offered to make a phone call. She had declined when her attorney friend offered to handle it in 20 minutes. She had put on old clothes and taken the bus downtown. She wanted to see courtroom 12 for herself. She had heard the name Raymond Pruitt before. Every legal aid attorney in the city had heard it. 17 years on the municipal bench, passed over for promotion 4 times due to what his evaluations described as temperamental unsuitability for appellate-level work. He had filed a formal application for an appellate vacancy the previous month. His sponsoring judge had submitted a glowing letter of recommendation. Celeste had read that letter twice. She walked through the metal detector at 8:51, found her seat in the back row, and waited. The courtroom smelled of burned coffee and old paper. The fluorescent lights above the gallery hummed at a frequency that made your teeth aware of themselves. The bench was high, dark wood, scratched along the lower edge by years of briefcases. A court reporter sat to the left of the bench with her hands resting on the keys of a stenograph machine the size of a small dog. At 9:04, the bailiff called the room to order. Raymond Pruitt entered. He was a compact man in his late 50s, with the posture of someone who had decided, somewhere around year 5 of his tenure, that height was a matter of attitude rather than biology. He moved quickly, without looking at the gallery. He sat down, adjusted his robe, and opened his docket without acknowledging the room. "Let's move," he said into the microphone. For the next hour and 20 minutes, Celeste did not look at her phone once. She watched. She watched Pruitt dismiss a parking dispute before the defendant had finished his second sentence. The man was trying to explain that the meter had malfunctioned. Pruitt did not let him finish. He simply said the violation stood and moved on before the man had lowered his arm from gesturing. She watched him override a medical exemption without reading the attached documentation. He set it aside with the flat of his hand, the way you push a plate you've already decided you don't want. She watched him speak to a man in a gray work shirt with the clipped tolerance of someone who had already decided the outcome and was annoyed at being asked to justify it. Then she watched him speak to a man in a sport coat 2 cases later with a gruffness that was still impatient but had a different texture to it. Less dismissal, more something like the ordinary rudeness between equals. She sat with that. Then came the case before hers. A woman named Miss Avery, middle-aged, alone at the podium, no attorney beside her. She had a folder in her hands that she kept adjusting and readjusting, the way people hold things when they're not sure if they'll be allowed to use them. She had been cited for failure to pay a series of parking violations. She had come prepared with documentation showing that during the relevant period, she had been between addresses and had not received the city's notices. Pruitt did not look at the folder. He asked her one question. She answered. He had already reached for his pen. "Failure to demonstrate receipt of notice does not excuse failure to respond to notice," he said. "Original violation plus administrative penalty. Pay the clerk." The folder stayed in her hands, unopened. Miss Avery stood at the podium for one more second. She looked down at the folder. Then she looked up at Pruitt. He had already moved to his docket. She turned and walked to the back of the room. She passed Celeste's row. She was not crying. She looked like a person who had prepared for something carefully and had arrived to find that preparation did not matter. Nora Wexler was sitting in the attorney's section to the left, 3rd chair from the aisle. She had a stack of folders on her lap and reading glasses halfway down her nose. She looked up from her own files during the Avery ruling. Her jaw didn't move, but she reached for a small spiral notebook, the kind with a hard cover and a broken clip on the spine, and wrote something down. Celeste noticed. She didn't know who Nora was. She filed the observation away. Docket 47. City versus Harmon. Celeste. She stood, smoothed the front of her pullover, walked down the center aisle and stopped at the defendant's podium. Pruitt glanced up, ran his eyes across her once, took in the worn sweater, the flat shoes, the absence of a briefcase or any credential signal he recognized. His expression did not shift. His expression never shifted, but something behind his eyes clicked into a particular category, and Celeste had spent enough years reading courtrooms to see it happen. He had already decided. Failure to yield at a controlled intersection, Pruitt read. How do you plead? Not guilty, Celeste said. Her voice was measured, carrying easily in the room. I have dashboard footage demonstrating that the intersection was unoccupied at the time of the alleged violation, and I'd like to request an opportunity to submit it to the court record. Pruitt leaned back. Is the footage certified through the vehicle's manufacturer system? It was recorded on a standalone unit, but I have the chain of custody documentation and the device logs. That's not the same thing. He picked up his pen. The citation is upheld. Celeste did not move. Your Honor, I'd like to note for the record that declining to review submitted evidence in a contested matter raises procedural concerns under the applicable traffic court rules. The pen stopped. Pruitt set it down slowly. He leaned forward. And where did you get that from? The court's own procedural guidelines, published on the judicial website. Section 4, subsection C. The room had gone quiet in the particular way. Rooms go quiet when something unusual is happening and nobody is sure yet what kind of unusual it is. Pruitt's face did not change color, but a vein near his left temple, one that hadn't been visible before, made itself known. I've been on this bench for 17 years, he said. His voice had dropped. That particular drop that people use when they want to sound in control of their anger but haven't quite managed it. I do not need a civilian reading me procedural guidelines. I'm not reading them to you, Celeste said. I'm reading them into the record. The court reporter's hands resumed their movement on the keys. Pruitt stared at her for 4 full seconds. Then he said, guilty as charged. Maximum administrative fine of $450. And given your conduct in this proceeding, I am additionally citing you for civil noncompliance, which carries a separate fine of $600. He picked up the gavel. $1,050 total. The clerk will process payment before you leave the building. A murmur moved through the gallery. The bailiff, a large man in his 50s with a gray mustache, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He did not speak. Celeste looked at Pruitt for one long moment. I'll need a printed receipt, she said, with each charge code broken out separately on its own line. Pay the clerk, and I'd like to formally request a certified copy of today's transcript. Pruitt picked up the gavel. We're done here. The court reporter has captured the full record? The reporter looked up, gave a single nod. Deliberate. He had been doing this for a long time, too. Pruitt brought the gavel down. Celeste turned, walked to the clerk's window, and paid $1,050 on a debit card that she had specifically brought for this purpose. She had not brought the card she usually carried. She waited for the itemized receipt. She folded it once, precisely, and placed it in the side pocket of her bag. Then she walked out of the room. In the hallway outside courtroom 12, she stopped at the water fountain and took a drink she didn't need. She straightened up and found a woman standing near the wall about 6 feet away, watching her. Nora Wexler, the one with the spiral notebook. You knew what you were doing in there, Nora said. Not a question. Celeste looked at her. I knew what I was saying. Nobody quotes Section 4, subsection C from memory on their first time through that door. Nora shifted the stack of folders under her arm. I've been practicing legal aid in this building for 14 years. I've filed 3 formal complaints about that courtroom. All 3 went to the deputy clerk's office. And I'm still filing them. She pulled a card from the top of her folder stack and held it out. Her name, the legal aid office, a phone number, whatever you're doing, I wrote down everything I saw today. If it's useful to anyone, it's yours. Celeste took the card. The complaints you filed, did Aldous receive them? Nora's expression changed slightly. Not surprise. The particular look of someone who has just heard a name they've said to themselves many times, finally said out loud by someone else. Everyone, she said. Celeste nodded. She put the card in her bag with the receipt. I'll read them, she said. She walked to the elevator. Before she pressed the button, she stopped at the deputy clerk's window. The man behind it was Aldous, mid-50s, round face, the manner of someone who had found a position of minor administrative power and had spent 2 decades becoming precisely the shape of it. She asked about the formal complaint process. He gave her a single-page form and a practiced speech about the 90-day review timeline and the standard internal evaluation process. His tone said everything his words didn't. This form goes somewhere, and that somewhere is a drawer. She took the form, folded it, put it in her bag without filling it out. Outside, on the courthouse steps, she stood still for a moment before calling Theo. The morning had turned colder. The sky had the low, gray ceiling of a day that had decided early it wasn't going to offer much. She thought about Miss Avery walking out of that room with the folder still in her hand. She thought about whoever had made the recording Theo would find later, holding a phone under a table trying to capture something that no one else would believe without proof. She could make a call right now. She had the authority. She could begin proceedings before the end of the day. And then she thought about what that would look like in 6 months. In a challenge. In a room full of attorneys arguing that the commission chair had used her office to settle a personal dispute, she put the phone to her ear. "Pull everything on Deputy Clerk Aldous," she said. "Complaint intake records, disposition law, every formal grievance filed against courtroom 12 in the last 4 years. All of it." A pause. "That bad?" "Worse," she said. "Get me the full picture before Thursday." She did this right, or she did not do it at all. Now, I need to stop here for a second, because what Theo found by Thursday morning is where this story changes shape. It was not 3 complaints. It was not even close to 3. In 4 years of Aldous managing the complaint intake for the lower courts division, 14 separate formal grievances had been filed against Judge Raymond Pruitt. 14 from legal aid attorneys, from defendants who had somehow found the form and filled it out, from a retired paralegal who had watched a hearing from the gallery and written a 2-page letter by hand, from a law student doing a court observation requirement who had described what she witnessed in 4 detailed paragraphs and submitted it the day after. Every single one had been closed within 48 hours. Not reviewed. Closed. Each with the same notation. Insufficient grounds for formal inquiry. Aldous had not forwarded a single complaint to the commission. Not one. Size, 14 people had done exactly what the system told them to do. They had filled out the form. They had mailed it, or walked it in, or filed it online. They had trusted that someone on the other side of that process was actually reading it. Nobody was. And Pruitt had kept going. "Okay, wait, I need you to hear this next part. Let me tell you about what Theo found in the audio file." 3 years earlier, another complaint had included a recording. A hearing in courtroom 12, played back through someone's phone held under a table. 43 seconds of audio. A man in his late 60s, homeless at the time, appearing on a citation for sleeping in a public park. Pruitt had not looked at the man's record, had not acknowledged the man's mention of a recent hospital discharge, had simply imposed the highest penalty available and moved to the next case. The man had no way to pay. He had left the courtroom with a judgment against him that would follow his credit record for 7 years. That recording had gone to Aldous's office. Closed within 48 hours. Theo sent Celeste the audio file at 6:49 in the morning. She listened to it once at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee. Then she set her phone face down on the table and sat there for a while. She did not listen to it a second time. She didn't need to. She had already decided what she was going to do. She had decided it on the courthouse steps. But now she understood the full weight of what she was carrying, and she let herself carry it for exactly as long as it needed to be carried before she picked up the phone and went back to work. "Okay, I need you to understand something about what Celeste did next. She did not call a press conference. She did not leak anything to a journalist. She did not use her title or her office's authority to short-circuit the process. What she did was spend 3 weeks building a file that could survive any challenge thrown at it, because she had learned long ago that power used correctly the first time is the only power that lasts. She obtained Nora Wexler's complaint logs through proper channel. She commissioned an independent review of Pruitt's sentencing patterns against comparable courts in the state. The disparity, when quantified, was not subtle. Pruitt's rate of top-tier penalties for first-time, unrepresented defendants was 3.5 times the state average. She had Theo compile the 14 closed complaints into a single indexed document. She reviewed each one herself, and she prepared for the gala. The annual Judicial Standards Conference was 4 weeks away. It was the largest gathering of legal professionals in the state. Every sitting judge of any ambition attended. A letter of invitation had already been processed by her office for Judge Raymond Pruitt. He had responded within 2 hours. He was lobbying for the appellate vacancy that would be announced at the end of the year. He wanted to be seen in the right rooms. Celeste made sure his seat was in the front section, table 3. clear sightline to the stage. She also made sure Nora Wexler received an invitation, with a note that her presence was professionally recommended. The conference was held in the ballroom of a large hotel in the city center. High ceilings, chandeliers that had been there since the building opened 40 years earlier, round tables with white cloths, each one set for 8. A raised stage at the far end with a podium and 2 large screens flanking it. Raymond Pruitt had been in the room for 2 hours when the program began. He had worked the perimeter tables, introducing himself, mentioning the appellate vacancy in the 3rd or 4th sentence of each conversation. He had buttonholed a senior appellate judge named Herschel near the bar, a man whose informal support could matter, and he had been holding court in the way he always held court, the way men hold court when they have convinced themselves that the volume of their presence compensates for everything else. He had not seen Celeste. He had not seen her because she had been in the backstage corridor since 7, going over her notes, speaking quietly with Theo, who had arrived with the bound document under one arm and the expression of a man who had read everything and wanted to say something important and knew this wasn't the moment for it. At 9:15, the outgoing commission vice chair stepped to the podium to begin the formal program. He spoke briefly. He thanked the sponsors. He introduced the keynote speaker. In the audience, Pruitt heard a name he recognized. His eyes moved to the stage as the curtain behind the podium parted, and he saw her. Not in the sweater, not in the flat shoes, a deep blue blazer over a white blouse, posture that filled the stage without effort. The ring back on her left hand. He had a specific fraction of a second where his brain refused the information and then accepted it in a way that felt like something physical. He looked like a man who had touched a stove he was certain was off. Celeste stepped to the podium. She looked out over the room. She let the applause settle completely before she spoke. Every person in this room, she began, knows that the health of a justice system is not measured at its top. It is measured at its floor, in the lowest courts, in the smallest rooms, in the hearings that last 8 minutes and affect someone's life for 8 years. She placed one hand on the podium, not gripping it, just resting. 3 weeks ago, I walked into one of those rooms. I dressed as an ordinary citizen because I wanted to see what an ordinary citizen sees. I had a minor traffic citation and a straightforward legal argument. She paused. I want to be clear about why I dressed the way I dressed. I did not do it as an experiment. I did not do it to test anyone. I did it because that is how millions of people walk into those rooms every single day. Without a briefcase, without a title, without any protection except the truth of what they're saying. And if I'm going to chair the commission that oversees the people who judge them, I need to know what that room feels like when you have nothing between you and the bench but the fact. The room was very quiet. She opened the bound document she had brought with her. I'm going to read from the certified transcript of that hearing, she read. Not dramatically, not with performance. The way you read a record into evidence, plainly, starting from the beginning, letting the exchange speak for itself. The procedural argument she had raised, the response from the bench, the escalation, her own replies, each one measured, each one answered with something harder. When she finished, several federal judges who had been half attending from across the room had turned fully to face the stage. The senior attorneys at the back tables had gone still. Nora Wexler, seated in the middle of the room, set down her glass. The person in this transcript is Judge Raymond Pruitt, who is seated at table 3. She did not point. She did not need to. 700 people turned. Pruitt sat completely still. His face had gone the specific color of a man whose body has understood something before his mind has agreed to it. Judge Herschel, who had been seated beside him, shifted his chair back by several inches with the careful, deliberate movement of a man who has made a decision. Before I came here tonight, Celeste continued, my office completed a review of the complaint intake records for the lower courts division. In 4 years, 14 formal grievances were filed against Judge Pruitt's courtroom. All 14 were closed within 48 hours by the deputy clerk's office, without escalation to the commission. She closed the document. I want to be precise about what that means. 14 people trusted the process. They did the work. They filled out the form. Not one of their complaints was reviewed by a person with the authority to act on it. She looked at the room. We talk about judicial accountability as though it is something that happens automatically, as though the system corrects itself. It does not. It requires people willing to do the unglamorous work of maintaining it, even when that work is uncomfortable, even when it touches someone with institutional standing, even when it is far easier to close the file and move on. She paused. My office has submitted a full investigative referral to the State Disciplinary Board regarding Judge Pruitt's conduct. A separate referral regarding the complaint intake procedures of the Deputy Clerk's Division is in process. Both proceedings are now a matter of public record. She looked up from the podium. The job of every person in this room is to make sure that the floor of this system is as honest as its ceiling. That work starts tonight. She stepped back from the podium. The applause began slowly and then became something else entirely. At table 3, Raymond Pruitt stood up. He didn't move toward the exit right away. He stood for a moment as if he expected a second option to present itself, some procedural mechanism that would allow him to contest what had just happened. None appeared. He walked toward the side door with the particular rigidity of a man who is trying very hard to look like he is choosing to leave rather than fleeing. He did not make it to the door without being seen. He was not supposed to. What came next was not fast, but it was complete. The disciplinary board convened a formal hearing 6 weeks later. Nora Wexler was the third witness called. She brought the spiral notebook with the broken clip, its pages covered in her cramped handwriting. She had been keeping notes on courtroom 12 since her second year of legal aid work. The notebook contained dated observations spanning 5 years. The board chair asked her why she had started keeping the notes. She said, "Because I kept filing complaints that went nowhere, and I had to believe that at some point someone would want to know what I had seen." She said it without anger, just as a fact. The notebook was entered into evidence as Exhibit 9. Aldous was called to testify regarding the disposition of the 14 complaints. He attempted to characterize his processing decisions as professional judgment. The board chair asked him to identify the specific review criteria he had applied to each complaint. He could not. He was asked whether he had read the attached documentation in any of the 14 cases. He could not confirm that he had. The board did not find that Aldous had acted with malicious intent. They found something in some ways more damaging, that he had built a habit of non-review so systematic and so consistent that it had functioned as a policy. He had not been closing complaints because he had evaluated them and found them lacking. He had been closing them because that was the path of least resistance, and he had been doing it for long enough that it had stopped feeling like a decision. He was removed from the complaint intake position. A formal finding was placed in his personnel record. An independent auditor was assigned to review the complaint logs for the full 17 years of Pruitt's tenure. The auditor found 41 closed complaints. 41. Pruitt was removed from the bench by formal order of the disciplinary board. The appellate vacancy went to someone else. His pension was calculated at the reduced rate applicable to judges removed for cause. He did not attempt to appeal. The legal aid office where Nora worked received a commission grant the following budget cycle for expanded court coverage. She used part of it to hire 2 additional attorneys for the morning docket. She did not apply for anything else. She just kept showing up. 2 months after the hearing, on a gray Tuesday morning that looked a lot like the one where this story started, Celeste walked back into the building. Not in the Heather pullover, full professional dress, the ring on her finger. She was there in her capacity as commission chair to observe the implementation of the new complaint intake procedures her office had drafted. An independent review panel now had mandatory authority over every grievance filed against a sitting judge. Required review within 21 days. A formal written response in every case. She sat in the back row of the gallery, not in courtroom 12. In courtroom 9, where the morning docket was already in session under a judge she did not know well. The judge was brisk but fair. She gave each defendant a full chance to speak. She read the documentation placed before her. When a young woman in the front row struggled to explain a paperwork issue, the judge asked a clarifying question rather than making an assumption. Celeste watched for 45 minutes. She did not take notes. Then she stood, gathered her coat, and walked back out into the corridor. Nora Wexler was coming out of the legal aid office down the hall, a new stack of folders under her arm, reading glasses on her nose. They looked at each other for a moment. Nora adjusted her glasses. "Same time next week?" she said. "Same time next week," Celeste said. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She waited. She was still wearing the ring. And here is what the ring was. She had been given it at her swearing-in ceremony 3 weeks before the hearing. It was a simple band, brushed gold, engraved on the inside with the date. She had put it on that morning without thinking, the way you put on something that belongs to you. When she had stood in front of the mirror deciding what version of herself to bring into that courtroom, she had taken it off and left it on the counter. Not because she was ashamed of it, because the ring was the chair, and the chair was not what she was bringing that day. She was bringing herself, the person underneath the title, The person who had sat in enough hard wooden benches in enough rooms like that to know exactly what Miss Avery felt when she walked out with that folder still in her hands. She wore the ring back in. She wore it the day she signed the new complaint review procedures into effect. She wore it every time she walked back into that building after that. The ring was a reminder, not of the power the position gave her, of why the position existed. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Think about the 14 people who filled out that form, who mailed it in, who walked it to the window, who typed it into the online portal and hit submit and waited. They did not know Celeste Harmon. They did not know anyone who could help them. They just believed that somewhere in the system, someone was supposed to read what they wrote. They were right. They were just early. The system failed them first, and then it had to answer for it. That is not a comfortable story. It is not a clean one, but it is a true kind of story. The kind where the people who kept doing the right thing when no one was watching are the ones who made the change possible when someone finally was. If that landed for you, tell me what part in the comment. And if you believe that the floors of our institutions deserve the same attention as their ceilings, subscribe. Because we are going to keep telling stories about the people who hold the line when it costs them something. Thank you for being here.